Hello, beloved Evergreen History of Motion Picture students, BHOMPs. I want to first of all apologize for getting this out later than I expected. Um, Family stuff and sickness and all sorts of things it kept me from doing that. But you knew that you had your micro theme, so I knew that you had some. I knew you had stuff that you needed to do. Anyway, get out a piece of paper and get ready to take some notes. I'll be checking these notes on Friday when you come in to check out yourself on this amazing performer, Harold Lloyd, of the what people call the great three of the silent comedic age. You have Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Harold Lloyd. And for years and years, people had forgotten about Harold Lloyd, despite the fact that he actually made more films than Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton combined. And pound for pound, his movies actually outgrossed all of them, even Chaplin. Combined, if you can adjust for inflation, his films grossed about $2.3 billion. So why was this guy forgotten over the years? Well, I'll just say that the ending is a good one because in the last, couple of decades, we're definitely seeing a resurgence of all of that. So let's talk about Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd, like Buster Keaton, American, Midwest, and he's from Nebraska. And in Nebraska, his family had to move around a lot because of just trying to find work. And he got jobs like selling popcorn at nearby train stations. And he would climb the church back in Pawnee City with friends to see who could climb it as well. And by the time they were halfway up, he was already down on the other side. He had a paper route, which he found actually quite influential in giving him sound business training. And he was movie crazy. He loved going to the movies. In fact, his first motion picture that he saw was when a medicine show came to Pawnee City, and guess what that movie was? Yep, 1903's The Great Train Robbery, also highly influential for Chaplin. And it's kind of an action movie. And we see a bit of that influence in Harold Lloyd, where there's action and suspense and stunt work to complement and build on the comedy. He put on amateur plays in the front yard with his older brother to try to introduce themselves to the kids. And like we said, he loved to climb things. He could show off. He won over his audience. And it made him stand out so he could have friends. And he was also very good at close hand magic, something that later he and director Orson Welles they had a mutual love of magic tricks, and Orson Welles later would say that his friend was surely the most underrated comedian of them all. And while he's moving around as he's getting older, he did start acting, but it was primarily in dramatic roles, things like Tess of the Dubervilles and Macbeth. When his father split, they went to L.A. When his father split from his wife, I should say, and he had an accident. He got some money from the injury, and so his parents are divorced. He's living with his dad, and so they go to Los Angeles. Now, the interesting thing is the acting thing was something he believed would have happened. He believed he would have become an actor either way, but he might have just gone a different route if little situations in life had been different. The thing about Harold Lloyd is what we're going to see. You have his very famous, perhaps more famous contemporaries like Buster Keaton, like Charlie Chaplin. They had an inborn comedic talent. Laurel and Hardy, Harry Langdon, they had an inborn comedic talent. Lloyd, the difference with him is he had to work at it. He never saw himself as a comedian, but he could play a comedian, and he worked really, really hard to do it. So he gets to LA, and while he's at Universal doing like bit roles, he meets up with a guy named Hal Roach. Now, Hal Roach is doing stuff as well at Universal, but Hal Roach had finally inherited some money, and he decided to start his own production company. Hal Roach later on would be responsible for creating the Argane series, which went in through the 1930s. It started in the silent era and went to the 1930s. If you are familiar with the Little Rascals, that's the Argane. They actually weren't called, little fun fact, they weren't called the Little Rascals until the 1950s when they were syndicated for television. Anyway, Laurel and Hardy pictures as well. So Hal Roach started a production company. He had kind of met up with Harold Lloyd at Universal, and he says, "Come on over, let's get a comedic character going here." And what they put together is a character they called Willie Work, and that is Harold Lloyd right there. The Willie Work character is pretty much like a ripoff of Charlie Chaplin, just going to say. But it's sort of an inverse ripoff. Instead of the baggy pants, he has the tight pants. Instead of the one part of the mustache in the middle, it's the rest of the mustache. They made 6 one-reel Willie Work characters, and they unfortunately did not work. Willie Work did not work. And 5 of those 6 actually are lost. Only 1 remains from that repertoire. There was a 1943 fire at Harold Lloyd's estate, and a lot of his film prints were lost. And so only 1 remains, and that's called Just Nuts. And Willie Work did not work. So Harold Lloyd leaves Hal Roach on amiable terms, and he goes to work with Max Sennett for a while, doing bit roles and those kinds of things. But he made about 23 films there. He was never a star, but he did work under the direction of Max Sennett. He also worked with, as well as under the direction of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, whom we mentioned before with Buster Keaton, and Charlie Chaplin's brother, Sidney Chaplin. So he's definitely learning his craft and learning about comedy. Eventually, he goes back to Hal Roach, who finds a distributor through Pathé, and they put out a series of films called Lonesome Luke, these Lonesome Luke characters. This Lonesome Luke character that Harold Lloyd puts together. Okay, guys, just going to be honest, nobody's trying to hide anything. This really is the same thing as Willie Work, okay? It's the same thing, but they called him Lonesome Luke, and actually these ended up being very successful. He makes about 80-something films, one-reelers, with Lonesome Luke. 67 pictures between July 1915 and December 1917. And you guys, I mean, think about that. He's making about a 1 reel a week. That's pretty amazing. And these were produced this is Hal Roach producing, Pathé distributing, and they called them fun films because they're fun films. But he gets a little frustrated. He wants to do something different. These were actually very successful, but he wanted to be more than a Chaplin imitator. And you think about it, most comedic screen personalities, they were built on the grotesque, okay? They were odd-looking wretches. They wore ill-fitting clothes. They had off-putting mannerisms. Even at their most appealing, comic personas were just, a little bit alien, kind of like Buster Keaton's stone-faced acrobat. And so Harold Lloyd wanted to create a character that audiences could relate to. Okay, and he had an idea. He wanted ones that people could relate to and they could root for. And some people at Pathé, with Hal Roach believed in it, but it was kind of like, well, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Lonesome Look is doing well. But he was very convincing. And what did he find? It's all about the glasses. He found it in a 75-cent pair of horn-rimmed glasses. Actually, it was just the frames, because he didn't actually need glasses. The lenses were removed so not to catch the stage lighting. So he wanted somebody that looked like the regular folk and they could relate to and root for. And that's who this guy is. This character is persona that's sometimes just referred to as Harold. You'll see in a number of his films, his character is referred as Harold. He's not playing himself, but he's Harold. Sometimes he's referred to as the boy. And in general, film historian, film analysis, he's often referred to as the glass or the glasses character. Okay, so he finds this great character, and it ends up being a huge, huge success. All right, so let's talk about his persona. Let's talk about film characteristics. This guy is the everyman. He's the average, working, middle-class man. Sometimes he's the small-town boy who wants to make good. Okay, he's wanting to be successful. Now, the humor and the gags come from the regular guy being thrown into a funny situation, a riotously funny situation. He's an average American. He's a nice lad that audiences can relate to, thrown into this funny situation. Some of the big themes, he's, like I said, that can-do spirit. He's kind of socially inept, but he's ultimately winning. He's about overcoming obstacles through persistence and luck. He's always dreaming of success. He's very plucky. He's optimistic. There's that inward determination. And this was an encapsulation of 1920s values. All right, he's a handsome, everyman kind of guy, and he's the guy who got the girl. Very different from Chaplin. All right. And that unique smile, like I said, the handsome guy is very charming, winning, endearing personality. He is an acrobatic and athletic guy. Keaton is also very athletic, but it's a very different style. You'll see it. And still very, very impressive. A lot like Buster Keaton, I probably more like Chaplin, but Keaton as well. Story and character. Hal Roach really believed in this as well. Story and character took precedence over the slapstick visual gags. Now, it doesn't mean there's no visual gags, of course, but it's all rooted, and the gags come from the story and the character instead of just kind of thrown in. We've talked about the role of women, and he's kind of in between when it comes to Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. He worships and adores the women, but he's not above including them in the action, in the gag, like Keaton. We find that a lot of the women in Harold Lloyd's films, they're kind of aloof, they're kind of distant. Sometimes they're just unaware of his struggles to impress them or his struggles to achieve success in order to win their heart or to provide for them. He very much wanted to pioneer the art of silent comedy with innovative camera techniques. Very much something Buster Keaton wanted to do. Charlie Chaplin doesn't seem to be as interested in that, as we talked about. A lot of his films, and I don't want to say all of his films, but a lot of his films, certainly the ones of the features of the 20s, a lot of phrases have been used to label them, called a comedy of thrills or suspense comedies or thrill pictures, high-rise comedies, because these situations that this regular guy is thrown in are situations that it looks like he can die, and it is Harold Lloyd doing these things, walking off the top of a building, or these immense chase sequences on the side of a mountain. One of the big differences between, I mean, we see that with Keaton, of course, but Keaton is a little more surreal. And when you watch Buster Keaton films, you kind of get the impression that he can take it, you know? But with Harold Lloyd, you get the impression that, oh my gosh, this guy might not make it. And that's a really big difference there. It's also one of the big problems with, I would say, modern action films, because we really don't believe that they're in danger. Everything is CG and green screen. And anyway, well, I'll get to that later. He doesn't seem to be really interested in a lot of social commentary, very different from Charlie Chaplin in that regard. The Freshman is a 1925 film. The Freshman has a bit of social satire, but it's certainly not something that defines his career. Very creative use of intertitle cards. There's something about the title cards that are almost jokes in themselves, and the use of illustrations even as part of the title cards. So you will enjoy those. All right, so let's talk about some things here. Again, he is at the height of his game, extremely popular, extremely successful. So successful, in fact, he's world famous. By the way, he actually appears as himself in an Our Gang short called Dogs of War, where the little rascals go into a movie set and they're running around from the security, and they actually meet Harold Lloyd, who helps them to hide. At the height of his popularity, he actually won a $10,000 bet with his crew and castmates, betting that he could take off the glasses and walk down the street and not be recognized. And this is something that he actually liked. He said, "With the glasses, I'm Harold Lloyd. Without them, I'm a private citizen. I can stroll unrecognized on any street in the land at any time without the glasses, and this is a blessing granted no other picture actor." He appreciated that. And like I said, he was on the verge of just immense fame. And then, boom, there was an accident. Now, by the way, Haunted Spooks, one of these two-reelers, one of my favorites of his, and it was during a publicity shoot for this. There's actually a couple of different accounts. One says it was during the filming. Another account says it was during a publicity shoot for this. But either way, it's connected to this film, and here's the big accident that happens. A photographer suggested that Harold Lloyd pick up a prop bomb, kind of round, cartoony things with the long fuses, and kind of strike a pose with it. For whatever reason, we're not really sure why, the bomb that they grabbed was actually a real bomb, and it was amongst a box of prop bombs. It was a stunt explosive. So he picks up what he thinks is a fake bomb. The fuse is now lit. It's coming to his face to light a cigarette for a funny picture. But the bomb is making too much smoke. The photographer couldn't see Harold Lloyd's face. And right as he lowers the bomb, right as Harold Lloyd lowers the bomb, it explodes. And the blast is mostly upward. It rips a hole in the ceiling. It breaks all the windows. Really, had Harold not lowered the bomb at that instant, he would have been killed. So he survived. The blast blinded him, not permanently. His face was burned. But the most significant part of that injury was it blew off the thumb and index finger of his right hand. So, what do you do? This is the comeback kid, though. This is Harold Lloyd. This is Nebraska boy. This is church climber. He couldn't quit, and he didn't. And so within months, he'd recovered from his injuries. He was ready to get back to work. Makeup could hide the burn scars, but what do you do with missing half of your right hand? So he actually got some help from makeup people at MGM who made him a prosthetic glove. It's made of leather, it's flesh tone, and the thumb and the index fingers, they're filled with rubber molds. The index and the middle finger of the glove are sewn together. Basically, here's the point. He didn't want people to go to the theater and say, "Oh my gosh, that's the guy with the missing hand." He wanted to maintain the illusion for the sake of his audience. So in the end, this bomb thing was just another obstacle for Harold Lloyd to overcome. And keep this in mind, because throughout the rest of his life, throughout the rest of his career, what you see him doing, he does with 1.5 hands. Very impressive. I'm going to post a link to Haunted Spooks. We're not going to watch it together, but that is one of my favorites, and you can check that out. Mildred Davis was one of his leading actresses. He ended up marrying her, and they stayed together till she died in the late 60s. Yeah, that actually happens in Hollywood, where marriages stay together. But she ends up being a great representative of that Harold Lloyd leading lady, like we talked about. And she stars opposite him up through Safety Last. So we talked about those high-rise comedies, the suspense comedies. You see it in films like High and Dizzy, in films like Never Weaken, certainly Safety Last. Later on in the sound era, Welcome Danger. So these kinds of things that Harold Lloyd is known for. And yeah, look at these shots. There's this sort of sleepwalker, and he's got to go out and try to help her on the ledge of the high-rise. All right. We start seeing features from him in 1921. Again, I'm not going to go over every single one, but he makes more movies than Chaplin and Keaton. This is not the first of his features, but we're going to talk about kind of the greats here real fast. Grandma's Boy actually was Harold Lloyd's favorite film of his, and it's basically about this cowardly country boy. He gains courage from kind of this magic charm, and there's a Civil War flashback and really great characterization. Grandma's Boy is a really, really special film. It's kind of like he's trying to he plays basically two parts, sort of two halves of the Glasses character in two different time periods, as this modern character is trying to live up to the legacy of this Civil War great grandfather of his, to be a hero like him. Safety Last certainly has some of the most iconic imagery in all, not only Harold Lloyd's films, but all of silent films. Again, we're not looking at all of them. It's that country boy coming to the city to be a success, and it ends with this publicity stunt, spectacular daredevil thrill comedy. Again, this is the last one he makes with Mildred Davis, whom he marries. The image of him hanging on the clock of the department store building. Roger Ebert, the famous film critic Roger Ebert, said that is probably the most single famous shot in silent comedy history. Girl Shy is also just, oh my gosh, it's just an amazing, amazing film. He's this shy stutterer. He writes a book about love. He's got to rescue the girl from marrying the wrong man, and it has this terrific race sequence at the end as he's trying to get there just in time. The Freshman is a little bit of topical satire. Very much in the 1920s, they talk about the big man on campus, and if you're going to be a popular college student, you had to play football. You had to be an athlete. And so this small town boy wants to go to college and be the big man on campus, right? And he tries to do it by being a part of the football team, although he's not, the most athletic. This was, he wants to be popular. This was actually the highest grossing silent comedy film, second only to The Gold Rush. Again, these films made a lot of money. So when people say, who's Harold Lloyd, they really don't know what they're talking about with silent comedy. And if you want to know how to really impress somebody with a terrific handshake, you got to watch The Freshman. The kid brother is the one that Harold Lloyd was probably the most proud of. It's this probably the best integration of all of Harold Lloyd's key elements. It's about this son of a sheriff, and he's got to prove his manhood. He's got to capture the crook. He's got to return the stolen money. He's got to win the girl. It's like all of these things put together. And like I said, Harold Lloyd was probably most proud of this work here, The Kid Brother. It really is a fantastic film and illustration of what he's all about. His last major, actually his last silent film comes in 1928, really at the transition of sound. And it's about this baseball-crazed city boy. He can't keep a job. He gets involved in mobsters. It's set in New York. It's got great location shots in New York. Got a great chase sequence and even an appearance by, who's that on the right there? That is Babe Ruth. You betcha. Now we get to the late 1920s, and it almost seems like he can do no wrong. He's one of the founding members of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He's only the 5th person to put his handprints and shoe prints, and a little glasses outline there, in the courtyard of Grauman's Chinese Theater. He is not shy about making the transition to sound, and throughout the 30s, he makes several sound pictures. He's not given director credit. I just want to make that clear. He's not given director credit, but he's very much involved in the creative process. And since 1923, he actually had become an independent producer. He parted very amiably from Hal Roach, and like we talked about, some of the more mature of those films. But he was the most profitable out of the great three. He made all of these different films. He wanted to make the transition to sound. He wanted to be a talking comedian, just like Buster Keaton wanted to. And he did okay. The films weren't flops. They weren't quite the same kind of charm and the same kind of box office success as the silent comedic films. In the bottom left there, you see Feet First, another kind of high-rise comedy. But by the late 1930s, he kind of very gracefully phased himself out of pictures and kind of retired, really. He did make one film. So his last real feature is 1938, and he makes one more film in 1947 with the great director Preston Sturges. But he pretty much was done. He gracefully walked away from it. Not because he was seen as a has-been or anything. He just felt like, my time is done. And one of the reasons may be the glasses character is very much a product of the 1920s. He's very much about you can succeed. Well, 1930s, that's Great Depression. They're not talking about, can do. They just want to talk about can survive. Okay? There's a big difference there. He certainly kept busy, right? He was not idle. He played handball with Douglas Fairbanks. He hung out with Cary Grant. He became a very active Freemason and Shriner. You can look up what that organization's all about, still around. And he was eventually appointed the Imperial Potentate of the Shriners of North America, and that landed him on the cover of Time magazine. It wasn't because of hanging off clocks or anything like that. After retirement, he was into microscopy, looking at microscopes and color science and 3D photography. He definitely was not idle. As you go through the 50s and 60s, he played himself on TV a few times, and he actually made 2 compilation films of his work, which in the 1960s introduced a new generation to his work. He built the huge estate Green Acres Mansion, where he spent a lot of his time with his family and met with famous people and hung out and did all of his hobbies and things. When he died, he actually wanted it to become a movie museum. He bequeathed Green Acres to be a movie museum, but it actually was later sold as an auction. Right. So what happened? How come we have the resurgence of Chaplin and Keaton, but what happened with Harold Lloyd? Well, one of the reasons people feel that his name, at least by the general public, was lost. And while Keaton's and Chaplin's have maintained, first of all, his films are clearly unjustly overlooked by the public. But one of the problems was he had very tight control over the presentation of his films. They were really not widely seen in the last half of the 20th century. He had total copyright control over these, and he was very, very particular about this. He didn't allow his films to be shown on TV. He hated the idea of films' momentum and plots being broken up by commercials, that they would be using the wrong projection rates and these sorts of things. I think another reason why a lot of people have sort of, quote unquote, forgotten about Harold Lloyd until the last couple of decades was he also had a very uneventful personal life. He didn't have the scandal of, say, of Chaplin. Well, it was hard to match the scandal of Chaplin, or sort of the drunkard resurgence Buster Keaton kind of thing. I mean, he was a very, very, very rich man. Variety in 1928 ranked him as the richest actor in Hollywood in 1928. So it wasn't like he was strapped for cash and trying to find work. He could concentrate on these things that he was interested in. There's a picture of him with, I believe her name is Gwen Cooper, who was a silent actress, sort of recreating a scene there. The top there is him with his granddaughter Suzanne, who actually has become highly important in the preservation of his films, getting into DVDs and Criterion collections, and so she's very much about preserving his career and the story of that. In 1952, he was awarded a special Oscar as a, quote, master comedian and good citizen. Some people have interpreted that as sort of a jab at Chaplin. Like it really wasn't for Harold Lloyd, but it was more about jabbing at Chaplin and the scandal that was going on there. But I don't really know if that's true. So the good thing is that Harold Lloyd has come back, and not really come back, but we've come back to him, and you guys are going to have a blast. His legacy, these are two covers of Time magazine. They have nothing to do with Harold Lloyd, but the iconic images that have come from some of his films they've used to make as cover photos for these ideas. So in 1990, on the left, high anxiety about looming recession and government paralysis. So using the scene from Safety Last to visualize that. And then on the right, from 1994, the cigarette in his mouth is added in, but the very classic image of all the guns pointing at him is from, it's either from Two Gun Gussie, which is a 1918 short, or an Eastern Westerner. I believe it's an Eastern Westerner. It's like, yeah, what do you do with them all pointing at? And then other filmic influences. We've talked about Jackie Chan being a great admirer of silent comedy. He definitely paid homage to Harold Lloyd in one of his films. Back to the Future certainly does as well. The Jim Carrey comedy Dumb and Dumber, the two friends, what are their names? Harold and Lloyd. So obviously influenced and pay homage there. Martin Scorsese's masterpiece, Hugo, it's pretty much influenced by all kind of silent films, not just comedy, but we see some direct influence of Harold Lloyd in that one as well. John Wick 2, the John Wick films, which are very popular, starring Keanu Reeves. The publicity photo, this is a publicity shot for John Wick 2. It's basically Harold Lloyd with an Eastern Westerner as they're promoting it. And Mad Max Fury Road, which was one of the best reviewed films a couple of years ago. It's heavily influenced by not only the General, Buster Keaton, but Harold Lloyd's chase picture, Speedy and Girl Shy. Incidentally, just a little take since I mentioned John Wick 2. John Wick 2 opens with a scene with Keaton Sherlock Jr. being projected onto the side of a building. So the point here with these modern action sequences is using that silent comedy syntax and these chase sequences to tell the story. Here, let me just tell you, here's what they got to do, okay? Here's how you recreate the greatness of these silent action comedies, whether it's Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd. Here's what you got to do, okay? Here's the formula. You take a movie star and you put them in serious trouble. Then you let them slowly but hilariously get out of this impossible pickle. And then you take a breather as the audience breaks into uproarious applause at the death-defying showmanship of it all. Okay? That's the legacy of Harold Lloyd. That's the hardworking Nebraska boy who used to sell papers for them over there in that small town. I want to close with a quote from very famous film critic James Agee talking about Harold Lloyd. Because if you want to cry, you can go to Chaplin. If you want to have the laugh and the thrill, but also the surreal comedy of it all, you have Keaton. For Harold Lloyd, he believed it was about giving audiences a laugh, a scream, and a laugh. But if you just want straight up laughter, you go to Harold Lloyd. And here's what he said. If plain laughter is any criterion, few people have ever equaled him, and no one has ever beaten him. They don't put the same stuff in thrills that they used to. People are trying to, but the guy who was not crazy about heights gave us quite a legacy of action and thrills and laughter. So I look forward to spending Friday night with you guys, with Harold Lloyd, and you guys are just getting the triumvirate of silent comedians and greatness here. I look forward to it, and I'll see